Right, so I'll just briefly introduce Allison. I find it's quite hard actually because Allison has a lot of title and has done a lot of things. And currently she's director and the lead e-learning and e-business consultant of digital capability in Australia. Unfortunately, Allison can't make it in person today because she's got a lot of things on, but luckily that we are able to do this collaborative session, and hopefully you feel the same. Feel free to put your hands up if you have any questions, and I'm pretty sure Allison's quite happy to answer them. Or alternatively, we have set up a link. If you could see, it's todaysmeet.com/amiller Okay, so if you have any questions, you could go on to that link and send questions, and both me and Allison will be monitoring the questions as well. Okay, right. And at the end of the session, we'll do a question as normal as what we would normally do. If Allison can't hear, I will just repeat it from here. Okay, right, Allison, thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and yes, my apologies. I would love to come to Auckland. I love that city, but unfortunately work commitments haven't allowed me to travel on this occasion. My introduction, as Chen has shared with you, my responsibilities spread across a few different areas. My background in terms of ePortfolios really started from a personal perspective. Around 10 years ago, I was looking for to move up in what was a career pathway. I didn't know at the time, but there was a career pathway in the organisation that I worked in, the training organisation I worked in. And once I hit a particular ceiling, I then had to create a portfolio of evidence from the last 5 years of my life. And I was a little bit annoyed that it meant I had to find 100 hours to pull together this portfolio of evidence of what I was capable of doing, when really somebody should have told me early on in my career that I should be collecting evidence along the way. Around the same time, a program that was running here in Australia called the Australian Flexible Learning Framework actually released a report called ePortfolios, this next thing that helps people transition through their life. And it was kind of like, well, you know, how I could see this, what was happening to me, that the future is going to want to see my past. This report was saying this is how we do it. We've got these technologies that allow people to do it. And then I became this advocate for ePortfolios and was allowed to run around for a little while, for about 4 years in Australia, solely talking about how ePortfolios can help people transition. Unfortunately, that government funding ran out and things have changed. But what happened, it morphed into ePortfolios Australia, which I'll share with you a little bit later on. Throughout that time, I was responsible for the ePortfolio business activity. We were able to do a number of bits of research. So I'm going to share with you today some of the research that was done by a group who look at doing privacy impact assessments. So employed to, I don't know if they're ex-lawyers, but people with legal backgrounds who actually did a privacy impact assessment on the use of electronic portfolios in the vocational education training sector and beyond. So what I'm going to do is go through, you know, what came out of that research. So, you know, why is it that we need to be managing or supporting learners manage their own privacy when using ePortfolios? What information what conversations should you be having around different forms of information that they're uploading into their ePortfolio, and how do they best manage that? And then what sort of support? So there's some great resources that came out of these projects, because we aligned with Queensland Uni of Tech at the same time, who created some higher ed resources that are still available. And then I'm going to do a little bit of selfless plugging of what's happening here in the ePortfolio scene and that you might be interested in. So the first thing is you know, why manage privacy around ePortfolios? So we defined ePortfolios as personal and private online spaces that learners manage their own personal information. So in its own right, you know, when we're talking about personal and private, and there's personal information, there's privacy concerns. And so we employed the group that I talked about. So there's the report there from Cooper and Crompton around so VET being the vocational education and training, ePortfolio privacy impact assessment research report. Don't think it's still available online. What they identified after speaking to a number of key stakeholders, including students, is that the dynamic nature of an ePortfolio itself, where it's learner-generated content and potentially that of their peers, means that there could be issues around things like copyright. So students might use content from the internet or content from another source, content from their peers, and create information and not necessarily maybe acknowledge that it comes from this area. So there may be information within their ePortfolio that is breaching copyright. It may be that it's breaching workplace confidentiality, that they've collected evidence that's either got intellectual property or it's got some other privacy implications. So if you think of aged care and people taking photos of children, or hospitals where you're naming wards and patients' names and so on, potentially you're breaking confidentiality and privacy laws, putting that information in there. And just by the nature of being online and potential to security breaches means that information about the individual may come out online that they didn't realise might come out because they thought they had this personal private online space that we allow them to help manage their information. What they also recognise is because it's an individual's personal private online space, we, especially in a Mahara sense, is that we give the learner a lot of control about who can access. So schools, you may knock it down a little bit different, so organisations may knock it down a little bit differently, so it might not be so easy for students. But when it came out the box, when Mahara came out the box in 2010, students could release their whole portfolio to the web. And with little or no understanding of the implications. This is 2010. I'm not even sure that iPad had been released by this date. So internet use was prevalent, but not necessarily to the level it is now, and not necessarily that people now have better digital literacy about protecting their privacy online. And so just by the dynamic nature of the system itself that allows individuals to actually release information freely on the web, or to individuals who may then freely send it on to other people, creates an opportunity for privacy to be breached. And again, the individual, the learner, not necessarily realising that this is possibly could happen in their personal private online space. And then the very last part about this dynamic and online nature of the portfolio system, where any online system has logs. So we know when people log on, we generally know what pages they're clicking on, and that these logs, as we know through social media sites, can start to create pictures about people. So there's, there was talk of where something like Facebook could probably dictate or determine what your sexuality is by the people who you are friends with, by the pages that you share, by the groups that you're involved in, that they could potentially predict what kind of sexuality you have. So students need to be aware that there's logs kept about them. And a super admin person, so somebody who's looking after the system, could actually access their ePortfolio. So a Mahara admin person can log in as an individual. So I have my own Mahara site. I can log into anybody and just check out their ePortfolio. So what does that mean around admin people responsible for looking after these private online spaces? And a number of organisations will actually have their Mahara third-party hosted. I know in New Zealand, the Education Department, Ministry of Education, look after a number of schools' Maharas, which is fine. Universities will look after theirs, but some other organisations might not. So smaller training organisations in Australia may have a third party hosting their Mahara, not necessarily updating for security breaches, and therefore, at any stage there could be issues, or they could have access to the students there. So there's all these possible opportunities for privacy, for an individual's privacy to be compromised, and so it's really important then that we take time to spend with learners to have conversations about managing their own information online. So that's what I'll go into now. The slide, I'm not sure how well that shows up on your screen, so Christian, I don't know if you want to give me a thumbs up. One thing I forgot to say at the beginning is I have put these slides up on SlideShare. So if at some point if you go to SlideShare/digital capability, they're available there. So you can, or email me and I'll send you a copy. But this comes out of, there's a link at the bottom of the slide. So this comes, it's just a screenshot from one of the resources that came out of this project that looked at, this was the learner's concept brochure. So we created a brochure to give to learners to explain to them the importance of managing their information seriously when using an ePortfolio, how do educators or academics support learners effectively manage their information online, and then how might an institution or an organisation support the whole process to reduce privacy being compromised. So we talked about things like, qualifications that, you might not necessarily want to include every qualification that you've got in your ePortfolio, because it may actually compromise your professional identity at some stage in the future. You might not want people knowing that you worked in an aged care home or that you were a builder or something like that. So, that really think about, what is this ePortfolio space for, and does it have to be the dump of everything that is about you? And if it does, then you better carefully manage how you release that information and who you release that information to. Things like putting up results, grades, assessment tasks into their ePortfolio that may expose information about other students. So if you're working on a group task and some of their work's there or some of the grades there, and so you might be happy to share your assessment activity with a third party, but the people in your group might not have been so happy to do that. Things like reflection, so making sure that when students are doing a personal reflection, that they don't identify, especially if it's a workplace, about work placement, that they're not identifying patients or intellectual property or even businesses themselves or other people that they're working with. So making sure that learners are conscious of that at the moment this is a personal private online space. I might only be sharing it with the educator or the academic or the teacher at the moment, but what happens if this super admin person comes in and sees it? Or what happens if I accidentally release the wrong part of my ePortfolio to the wrong person and this information is not being de-identified and compromises somebody else's privacy, or compromises my own if I've got information in there I wasn't expecting other people to see. And the same things with who you might have around referees and the like. So it's kind of ongoing story of really thinking about what if this did get out online, should it really be kept in this kind of space? So I'll just move on then. So what can you do to support? So what is the sorts of things that should be happening? So at a high level, or the three main actions that the research came out was, it's really important when creating an ePortfolio with learner groups or professional associations are the same, that we are very clear, and the students or the professionals are very clear about what that ePortfolio is for. And generally that's for a professional identity. So I know I've worked with people where they had students put their work samples into their ePortfolio, but then they started putting in their party photos like they would Facebook. So they had to have the conversation about, no, this is a professional space. This is about you as being a professional person. Your personal information, like, your party photos, you can go to Facebook. Lock that down too, please. But, your identity in an ePortfolio generally is about you being a student, about you being a professional, and that's the person that you're, or the persona that you're developing in that space, and that you keep the personal, more private stuff, either it's not online at all or in a space that people are expecting to see those sorts of photos about you or information about you. So what's the identity we're doing there? You need to let learners know that other people can access the ePortfolio. So even learning management systems are the same. When I first got into delivering online in 2005, the first thing I realised is I can work out whether students have been doing their work or not, whether they've been accessing information to do their work or, you know, submitting their work. So I quickly told them, don't come in on Monday and tell me that the dog ate your homework, because I know whether you've been in there doing anything on the weekend. So, like, be upfront. Learning management systems, ePortfolios, let them know that there's logs and activity logs that do dictate their kind of activity. Or, you know, if somebody reports that their ePortfolio is not appropriate in some way, that an admin person may log in and look at parts of their ePortfolio. So they need to be made aware of these things if you don't already do so. And then lastly, this would be at the educational level, as part of your implementation with students, is really getting them to think about, how do you manage your privacy? How do you make sure that the information that you're putting in there remains private, but also that you're only putting information in there that you know that if there was a breach, then of some sort, or somebody did come in and have a look about what you're doing, that you're not compromising yourself or people that you may have been involved in before. So things like de-identifying people and locations, or any way of connecting you with things that might be causing confidentiality or privacy issues. Just going to keep moving on, and I'll allow some time for questions at the end. I haven't seen anybody using the today's meet, so there's no questions there. So again, there's that link. If you put in ePortfolio QUT into a web search, QUT being Queensland Uni of Tech, then you should get close to this particular page. So it's kind of their toolkit. That's probably what you've put in, ePortfolio toolkit QUT, or QUT portfolio toolkit. You won't want to write that long URL down, and you'll see that there's concept brochures, 3 concept brochures around managing privacy, but then there's another 6 concept brochures around the implementation or the supporting of the use of ePortfolios in a higher ed university sense. So there's lots of really good resources there that you might want to tap into, and there's some research there. If there's anybody working in the vocational field, I'm sure I've got some hard copies somewhere. What happened was we wrote these together. We wrote the privacy ones together, and so we badged or used language for the higher ed around academics and the language that academics would use, and then the vocational education training sector, very similar information, but we used the language of what a trainer or a student in the vet sector would be used to hearing. So I've got some hard copies if anybody's interested in accessing those. Just going to quickly, I've got 3 minutes left as far as I can see, just share with you, sorry, that's the incorrect slide there, share with you some of the things that are happening in Australia. So I'm also lucky enough to work with people from University of Western Australia, Edith Cowan University, University of Queensland. So I'm going to go from the far west to the far northeast to the, I don't think we've got any from UTAS yet, University of Tasmania, but certainly a number of Melbourne, Canberra-based, Sydney-based universities who volunteer to run this group called ePortfolios Australia, which is a professional network. Everything's free because nobody's paid to do anything. We've got one webinar coming up on the 30th of May around people sharing practice on how they do evidence-based practice or reflection against outcomes such as professional standards using ePortfolios. So it will be at 4:30 Australian time. So if that time doesn't work for you, just register for the event anyway, and we'll send you the recording and the resources afterwards. So have a look at the ePortfolios Australia website to get access to that. We just last week opened up the call for papers for the ePortfolio Forum. This will be the 6th ePortfolio Forum happening in Melbourne, right in the city, in Collins Street, at the Monash College and University under the same banner there. And so we'd really love for people to consider putting in a paper, which closes on the 22nd of May.
As I said, we have run the ePortfolio forum and webinar, forum for 6 years. The webinars I think we've done for 3 or 4 years. So you can imagine there's a whole bank of resources there in terms of recordings, but also we've got about 110 plus PowerPoint presentations on our slideshare.net. So that last blue link there, slideshare.net / ePortfolios Australia. There's a lot of resources there about, and that's from people who've presented, whether they're in Australia or not. So that's in a nutshell what to consider, why it's important to help learners manage their information in an ePortfolio, what sort of things to consider and discuss with students when you're helping them manage their information in ePortfolio, and where some of the resources are to help you do that so you're not recreating the wheel. And a bit of a selfless plug about what's happening in Australia around ePortfolios. So ideally, and I think this leaves the 10 minutes for Q&A, if I'm happy to take any questions at this stage. Good, thank you. Oh, hello, Stephen. Yeah. So yeah, so what's happened is that there's the yin and the yang, isn't there? There's kind of got the yin and the yang, I'm not sure if you can see back to picture, where people get really excited, especially for work placement, so work integrated learning in universities. People get really excited about this concept, that, and some great stuff. So La Trobe are doing some fantastic stuff in the health science area, where students are going out on placement and they're getting live data on a regular basis about how students are performing there, whereas previously they'd sent them out and, you know, fingers crossed they'd be okay, they'll do a visit and hope they're okay, whereas now they've got this constant contact with students and this live data about how students are performing and giving them feedback immediately. So they get really excited about that. But then they're placing them in highly confidential areas such as, you know, hospitals. So there's angst about that sort of stuff. So Shane Noiser, who I think presented this morning and will be presenting if he's not already, did some research as part of his master's around what's some of the unintended consequences of using an ePortfolio. And of that, what he's done is been able to rally a group, quite a large number of people, up to about 10, I think, who are putting together a research brief. We're currently in the process of applying for permission, so it's around the national ethics approval process here in Australia, and that again will involve Uni of Canberra, Australian Catholic University, Uni of Western Australia. I think we've got somebody from far north, it might be James Cook, and Uni of Queensland as lead academic researchers plus associate researchers. So the short of it is yes, people have got yes, I really love it, but I'm really a bit worried about it. So what we're doing is further research to find out what some of the unintended consequences and what you can do to plug that to prevent it. I think it's like anything though, you're better off being, you know, doing the primary care, doing the stuff. Have a look at the resources that have been developed there. They're very good. Having the conversations about it, because whatever you're teaching them around their ePortfolio, and this is where you might be able to sell it in your universities or your organisation, is whatever you're teaching them about privacy in an ePortfolio, you're actually helping them about when they go into industry and how they manage industry information. You're also helping them about managing their own digital privacy and literacy in a very digital, you know, world. So I think if a number of universities here have started to get this digital capability graduate attribute, and it's like, well, what better way of doing it than actually helping people manage their information online, but in a very safe and controlled way. Hello.
I think we were online 6 months ago, and then I got rudely interrupted. The question that I've got follows on that very issue. The ePortfolio, the Mahara ePortfolio has got three basic tenets in it, and one of them is curation, and it's the least well understood, and that's the one that affects the privacy issue. What am I going to curate into this ePortfolio? And so I think that this debate is very, very relevant, and it's happening because from the outset we've ignored what actually that word curation means.
So, David, I think what happens is, and it may be the same in New Zealand, I imagine it's internationally, is that we've got people who are in educational organisations who weren't necessarily, who are not digitally literate themselves. They're not critically digitally literate themselves. I ran a workshop, a webinar last week around, how do you support students in a digitally disrupted, how do you support students build digital literacy in a digitally disruptive world, is what it was called. And I kind of got the feeling, and there's, you're in a webinar, so it's hard to get the feeling of how people are feeling. It's usually because they're not doing anything. That the people were there because they were scared about managing their own digital personal private information. So how the hell are they going to help other people do this stuff? So we've got to, and I think if you look at Deakin University's got a great digital capability resource there, and I think it's targeted at the academics about how do you do this. And my thing at the end of this webinar with these people who I felt they needed to improve their own was, look, do a little bit yourself. Go out and do a little bit of this stuff yourself, and then get your own ePortfolio. I didn't kind of say the ePortfolio, but go out and do a little bit of managing yourself online, because that's the best way you're going to learn, and do it in a kind of safe way, like with other professionals and so on. So yeah, I think because, David, curating information online is hard. That's why we pay a lot of people to do web developing. Businesses want websites. The biggest hurdle is they don't know how to get the content together. The web developer can do it for them. So the same thing is happening in the business world as it's happening in the academic world. We've probably hope that the millenniums who are coming through our universities, if not this year, next year, will help shake that up a bit.
Say that from my experience working with lecturers, what I find is they can cover what needs to be got in on the page. Like say, please, if it's early childhood education, they would say don't put the specific kid's name or the picture on the page because there's privacy issue, and they can educate the student on that. I think that what is lacking really is the guidance in terms of how do you make share the permissions online, and what is behind it. And that is, I think, lecturers are lack of this experience of themselves using it, that they can't really guide the students. So thank you, that was really good.
Very good. Thank you.